Hey, so this is a quick demo of Astro Editor's features. An Astro Editor is basically a desktop app for authoring Markdown and MDX content in local Astro sites. And unlike a lot of code editing tools, it's designed for use when writing prose, and specifically for prose, not for writing code. So we've got an Astro site here, and this is not a great environment for writing in. So I've got all this Frontmatter here. I've got a whole load of imports because this is an MDX file, and the actual content down here. This is not how I want to be writing prose when I'm actually creating content or editing content, because this environment is designed for code editing, and it's great for that, but it's not brilliant for this. This is a much better environment. This is the same file open in Astro Editor, much better environment for writing code in, for writing prose in even. I've just got the Markdown I want. It looks nice. It's super minimalist. I've got focus mode switched on. This is what I want when I'm writing content and I'm in kind of writer mode. And this is what I want when I'm fiddling with that and making sure that my Astro site builds before I deploy it. This is writer mode stuff, and this is coder mode stuff. And Astro Editor is designed specifically for writer mode stuff. So there's a bunch of things it doesn't do, but what it is designed is to basically get out of the way and allow you to write content and to edit content as easily as possible for local Astro sites. So this is the Astro site that we're going to be working with in this demo, and it's basically just a very, very simple Astro site. And I'm just going to show you how it's structured, because it's important to understand the file structure on disk, which Astro Editor reads. And what we can see here is we've got a basic Astro site, and inside the src directory, we basically have our content collection. And Astro Editor works with Astro's content collections only. And if we have a look at what we've got in here, in terms of the various collections, we have a JSON collection, which is for authors. And so that is basically just a simple plain JSON file that has an ID, name, email, and bio described in Zod. And we can see the content for that if we go into content, and then we go to authors. Very simple JSON file. Now, Astro Editor doesn't let you edit this because this is very much a coding concern, not a writing concern. It does let us reference this, as we'll see in a second. And then we have three collections, which are collections of Markdown or MDX files. So there's an articles collection, which looks for Markdown or MDX files here. And we can see that we're using Zod, and we're using a bunch of different Zod schema fields here. So we're using descriptions, which are pulled in to Astro Editor. We've got some constraints on here for character limits. These things are strings. We've got some defaults. This is a Boolean. We've got some date fields. Some of these are optional, some of them aren't. We've got an array of strings here, right, for tags. We're also using Astro's image helper here, and that, again, is rendered out as an image picker field. And then we've also got an enum field here. And then we've got some references. So this refers to that authors collection we looked at earlier. And this down here is an array of self-references, right, for related articles. So that's the first collection, articles. Very similarly, we've got a notes collection, very similar setup here, only we've got a couple of nested objects for metadata and the cover image. And then finally, we've got a books collection, which again is very, very similar, using a bunch of constraints. So this is the collection or the Astro setup we're going to be working with. Now, when we look at the actual content, we can see that this is all stored within src/content, and we've got a directory for each Markdown collection. If we look at notes, that's just got a bunch of Markdown and MDX files in it. And if we look at these, they all have Frontmatter, and some of them have got some imports at the beginning because they're MDX files, right? Similarly, if we look in books, same kind of setup here, right? And then if we have a look in articles, the only difference here, again, same kind of setup here, but inside articles, we have some subdirectories which each contain content in them. So this is quite a typical setup here. The only other things I should mention in this setup is that we also have a components directory in src, which has got a folder called MDX in it. And this contains the kind of components that we might want to include in MDX files. So an example of that would be a callout. And this is just an Astro component which I might want to include and use in an MDX file. And in fact, we can probably see an example of one of those being used. If we look in here, this alert component here is this React component here. That's kind of a specific type of component, and obviously in a real Astro site, we'd probably have a load of other components in here that are not designed to be used inside MDX files. They're designed to be like your site header or whatever. Then the final thing we should talk about is the assets directory. So this is where things like images and files are going to go. And this has got a bunch of subdirectories in here for articles, books and notes, one for each collection. So any images which are used inside the books collection inside those files are stored in here. And that's basically the only structure that Astro Editor cares about, the stuff in here. Now, I do want to mention that when you run Astro Sync or Astro Dev or Astro Build, it will generate this .astro directory. And in here, it will auto generate some JSON files, one per collection. And we can see in here, these are basically JSON representations of the schema. And the way that Astro Editor works is it reads these files to understand the schema, and then it enriches them with some information that it gets from the config file around things like images and references. And it's that which is then used in Astro Editor to display various Frontmatter panels and so on and so forth. Okay, so to open up an Astro site in Astro Editor, you can open it up, click on this folder, or go to File, Open Project. And then all you need to do is choose the root directory of your Astro project. And what that will do is it will load in all of the various content collections which load down our MDX files from your schema. And so you can see we've got 3 here. We don't have the authors collection because it's a JSON type collection, but we've basically got the same representation we just looked at here. If I go into books, we can see I've got all of these files here, and I can open these up in the editor and edit them. And if I go into articles, we can also see those subfolders are down in here. And I can just switch between these, and then I can edit the actual content in here. Now, what you'll see when I open up these files, if we open up, say, this article here, we don't have any of the Frontmatter visible. That's all being rendered out on the right in here. And we don't have any of the MDX imports visible. That's still there in the file on disk, but it's just hidden from the editor view because we don't care about that when we're in writer mode. Creating new files, basically, if I'm inside a collection like articles and I press the new button up here, or I go to File, New, or I use Command N, it will create a new file in the current collection. So if I do this, it's going to create a new file here. And that behaves exactly as you'd expect. So we've now got a new MDX file that's been created here. And if we go over and have a look on disk, we can see that that has been created here on disk with the correct Frontmatter that I filled in. Now, a couple of other things that I want to mention about the sidebar here. You've got some of the things that you would normally expect. So if I right click on a file, I can reveal in Finder, copy the path, can duplicate it properly. I can rename it to something different, all inside the editor. And if I've got an IDE configured, I can go to Open in IDE, and that will open it in Cursor or VS Code or whatever IDE you use is. And I can also obviously delete these here. Basically simple file management stuff. Anything more complex should be done in your text editor. I've also got a drafts filter up the top here. So if I click this, it's going to just show any of the articles that are marked as a draft. And it won't show me anything else. And that works exactly as you'd expect. And we'll talk a bit more about drafts later on. And that's basically it for the sidebar and how that works. So let's talk a little bit about the actual editor panel here. It works exactly how you would expect most Markdown editors to work. So I've got basic syntax highlighting for things like lists. This works for numbered lists as well. It all works as you'd expect. You can indent things with a keyboard shortcut, and it kind of works how you'd expect, right? It also supports inline formatting for things like bold. Command B will make this bold. Command I, we can make this bold. I can use Command K to insert a Markdown link. And if I have a URL on the clipboard and I select a piece of text and paste it over that text, it will insert that as a Markdown link. Headings are also supported. So I can use down headings, heading 1, and there are keyboard shortcuts for this as well. So Option Command 1 is a heading 1, Option Command 2 is heading 2, 3 is heading 3, 4 is heading 4, and Option Command 0 is just a paragraph. Those are basically the same as Notion's keyboard shortcuts. We do support images as well. So, as you would expect, if I've got images like this,
you get exactly what you'd expect with the kind of syntax highlighting. It also supports inline code with backticks, and we do support fence code blocks in the way that you'd expect, but we don't have any syntax highlighting in here. And that's because when you're actually writing code examples, you're better off doing that in a coding environment over here, where we are going to get proper syntax highlighting and we're going to get linting and stuff if we've set up our text editor. So it's fine for like just quickly viewing it, but really we should be using the right tool for the job if we're putting code examples in our writing, and we should probably be writing the code examples in this kind of environment and writing the prose around them in this environment. That's basically the editor features. There isn't a lot more to the actual Markdown editor itself. As far as saving is concerned, we can save a file with Command S, as you would expect. This is the save button up here. Auto saving happens every 2 seconds by default. That's configurable. You can see if we're typing, that icon will be available, and then after 2 seconds it will save that to disk, and that then means that that has been persisted to disk over here. It does also save every 10 seconds regardless of if you're still typing, just so if you're in kind of flow state and typing loads, we don't run the risk of not persisting that to disk every 10 seconds. That's basically the main Markdown editor view. So let's talk about the Frontmatter panel now, right? So this basically reads the schemas for your content collections in addition to the actual Frontmatter in the files, and it will display a field here for every field that is available in the schema for this content collection. And so if we look at the actual Frontmatter of this file here, only the mandatory fields have been filled in here because all the other fields are empty, right? So in fact, if I was to clear out one of them, it would clear that perfectly fine, right? It won't insert all of these. However, if we do start putting something in here, we'll see that that's now been correctly added in here. And if we clear that out, it will go away again. We try to be sensible here with the type of UI that's rendered out based on the field. So text fields are obviously rendered as text boxes. Specific types of text field can be rendered out if they're named a certain thing as text boxes. Boolean fields are rendered as switches. Dates are rendered as date pickers, as you would expect. Number fields, I think if we go and look in books, there's some number fields. Like rating are rendered out as number pickers. Lists of tags or lists of strings are rendered as this kind of tag picker. And then we can also, references basically are rendered out as a list. So this is a reference to the author's collection. And if we go have a look back at articles again, we can also see that the image field is rendered as an image. So I could drag this image over here and it will correctly rename that file, upload it properly to the correct assets directory, and then it will show me a preview here. And it is possible to edit this manually. And then where we have an enum in the schema, it will render that as a dropdown, exactly as you would expect. And we do support nested objects as well. So if there's a nested object in the schema, like I think there is for notes, we can see that it will correctly kind of display these grouped together in the way that you would expect. Now, it does also support Frontmatter fields which are not in the schema. So if we come and add another one here called demo hello and save that, that will now appear at the bottom, but these are pretty much always rendered as text because we don't have the schema to tell us enough about them. And they will always display at the bottom. So any Frontmatter fields in your files that are not in your schemas will appear at the bottom in alphabetical order. And then the only other thing to mention here is how we use some of the constraints to display stuff here. So obviously mandatory fields are marked with asterisk. We're looking at articles because our schema here has got a constraint between 3 and 100 characters and a description. That's being rendered up here, and we have the description above it. And it generally does its best to respect those descriptions and various other constraints that are there. Now, there's 4 special fields that, depending on their name, and all of these are configurable in their settings, which I'll show you later, get special treatment. First of all, the title field, if it's called title, it's always rendered at the top, no matter what order it comes in the schema. And it's rendered with this kind of bold setting up here. If you have a field called description, it will render like a bigger text area. And then pub date is rendered the same as any other date. But if it's called pub date or date, it will be used to order the sidebar. So the newer the date is, the the height will be in the sidebar. And then the last one is draft. So if you have a Boolean field called draft, that will be used to put this little draft label on it in the sidebar. So if I make this into a draft, we can see that this now has draft is true up here, and that's now labeled as a draft in the sidebar. And obviously if I filter by drafts now, that's going to appear in that filtered list. And the actual field names of all of these, there are some defaults that are supported, but we can configure them on a collection basis in the settings. So let's talk about some of the other nice to have features in the editor beyond basic Markdown editing. So first of all, Astro Editor is meant to be a simple editor. It's meant to give you a really nice, minimalist, distractionless view for writing prose. And so generally when we're writing, we're going to want to hide the two sidebar panels once we've set up our Frontmatter. So we can do that with the buttons in the title bar up here, or we can use keyboard shortcuts. Command 1 and Command 2 will hide the left and right sidebars. So if I do Command 1 and Command 2, we're going to get a much cleaner interface here for editing the actual content. And then once I start typing, it'll get even cleaner because the stuff in the title bar at the top will disappear and fade into the background. And this gives a completely clean, distractionless environment. And if I want to bring those back again, I can just hover up here and I'll get my title bar back again. Now, we can also turn on focus mode, which is this little button up here. And if I turn that on and start typing, this is only going to show me the current sentence and all the rest of it's grayed out. So that can be really nice when you kind of want to be in flow state, just typing stuff out. It keeps your focus just on the sentence you're editing at the moment. But if we turn that off for a second, there are some other editing related features here. One of them is the ability to show highlights. So if I just go down into the command palette, which I can open with Command P, we look for this highlight section. I can basically choose to highlight adverbs or adjectives or conjugations or verbs. And if I just turn all of them on, we'll see that each of these gets a different color. Now, that's probably not that useful. More likely, what you're going to want to do is turn all of them off. And then say we just wanted to show conjugations. This is just going to highlight all of these things here, right? Conjugations. And this can be really useful just when you're editing. So let's just hide all of them for now. So that's kind of one of the nice editing features. Another feature that's pretty helpful, if I want to drag in an image to here, let's say I want to pull in a picture of a dog, right? I can drag that in. And what it's going to do here, a bit like when we brought in some stuff to the Frontmatter panel down here, it's going to rename the file. So that file was just called Doggy Dog with a space in it. It's going to rename it to remove. It's going to put today's date in, and then it's going to copy it over to the correct assets path for this current collection. And then it's going to insert the correct path in here for that as a relative path to the current file. Now, if we want to actually see this without having to go over here and go up into our assets directory and look for the dog picture here, if we want to see that, we can just hold Option as we're hovering over it, and we'll see a preview of that down in the bottom right, which is pretty useful if you're just trying to remember exactly what that picture was of. And in a similar way, if we have a URL like this, if I hold Option over that, I can click on it and it will open it up in a browser for me, as you would expect in most text editors. And then I think probably the only other thing that I maybe haven't mentioned yet is that it's possible using the command palette to also open this in the configured IDE. So if I want to open this file in the configured IDE, I can go to Open. The Open Project in IDE will open the entire project. Open Collection will just open this collection's content folder. Open File will open this particular file up in the IDE. And you can obviously do that as well if we show the sidebar by right-clicking and choosing to open the file here. Now, if we're in a MDX file and we want to insert one of our Astro components or React components or Svelte components or whatever that we've specifically designed for using in here, things like maybe a call out or an alert box or something, we don't want to have to be coming over into our coding thing, going and looking in here, finding the call out, remembering what props it is. Ideally, we want to just be able to seamlessly insert that. And we can do that with the component builder. So Command / in an MDX file will show us all of those items that we have available. So if I want to put a call out in here, I'm going to go to call out, select that, and it's going to show us the builder and all of the props which are available. So let's say I want to include a title and an icon in this. It's going to preview at the bottom here what we want to insert, and then Command Enter is going to insert that. which allows us to just fill this out, and I can tab through the various different props. And there we are. We've inserted that a lot easier than having to go elsewhere. Now, it's not going to actually insert the correct imports into this file because that's a coding brain thing, right? We should deal with that when we're actually running it and looking at it in our text editor. It does just mean it's really easy to not lose your flow when you want to insert something like this as you're writing code. And if we do that with a React or Svelte or Vue component, something like this, we're also going to have the ability to choose a client directive here in Astro, so we can toggle on either idle or none or whatever. That's how the component builder works. And the last thing that I want to show you is the preferences and how we can configure various things in here. So if I open the preferences, either from the main menu up here or with Command comma on a Mac, we've got a number of different types of preferences. So the general global preferences basically allow you to choose one of the pre-configured IDEs, and that's what's used to open in an IDE, either the project or the file. We can also choose a theme, so we can switch to dark mode if we want, and it behaves exactly how you'd expect, or we can use the system preferences. We can also choose a default file type for new files. So when you create a new file, you can globally choose to either have it be Markdown or MDX, depending which you tend to use the most. And obviously, if you create a different type of file, you can just rename it and change the file extension. We've got very few visual customizations in here because Astro Editor is supposed to be opinionated about how it works and very minimalist. So we're deliberately not allowing users to configure loads and loads of different things, but one of the things we do let you configure is headings. So you're able to pick a color that is used to render out all of the headings in your document, and there's two options for light mode and dark mode here. And then we've also got a configuration for the autosave delay if you want that to be different from 2 seconds. And then we have project settings. So there are some standard defaults here which are built into the editor. So it expects the content of your Astro site to be in SRC content. It expects your assets to be in SRC assets, and it expects to find MDX components in SRC components MDX, right? However, if for your project you've got different paths for these things, you can override them here. So you can put in your own path relative to your Astro project root for where it should find all these things, and that will be respected then when it's looking for content collections, when it's saving assets that you've dragged in, or when it's looking for MDX components. You can also toggle on and off absolute paths relative to the Astro project root. By default, Astro doesn't support, it uses relative paths for images in Markdown files, but a lot of people set up their Astro sites to use absolute paths relative to the project root. So if you toggle that on, when you drag an image in or add an image to Frontmatter, it's going to put in an absolute path rather than a relative path. And then we can also override on a per project basis the default file type for new documents, whether it's MDX, and that will just override whatever the user setting in generally. And then in a similar vein, we can override most of these things on a per collection basis within a project. So because we're inside demo project here, I currently don't have any project overrides set here. But if I go into articles, right, I can now override these. So if the assets directory specifically for this collection is different than for a different collection, I can override that here by setting it. And again, collection overrides, they override the project-based overrides, which override the defaults. And all of that stuff's respected. We can do the same thing with MDX default for new files here. But one of the important things to mention here, in the collection settings, because these are only in collection settings, you can map the various Frontmatter fields per collection. So those fields I mentioned earlier, they get treated specially in the Frontmatter bar. Publish date obviously is used for ordering in the left sidebar. Title field is used to render the title at the top. Description is the same, and the draft field is used to mark drafts. There are some sensible defaults configured, but if you've got something unusual, like if we go and have a look at the books collection, the draft field is not just called draft, it's called draft book review. And so in order for that to work and mark drafts on it, we need to choose that from in here. And so we can go ahead and select that here, and that will now use this field for the draft filtering within this collection. So if you have some slightly unusual names or some of these aren't working, just come into here on your per collection basis and come and choose which of the string fields is actually your title in here. And that will all be saved and persisted in the setting. And then the last thing is advanced, which really is only used for debugging stuff. If you have some problems with preferences saving, you shouldn't need to come in here at all. So yeah, that's the preferences. So that's a very quick half-hour overview of Astro Editor and its main features. If you want to download it, head over to astroeditor.danny.is and you can download it, or you can use Homebrew Cask to install it. And if you find any bugs or you've got any issues, head over to the GitHub repository and open an issue on the Astro Editor repo.